Hello, my name is William Smith, and I'm going to share with you the fundamental challenges that school districts face when it comes to declining enrollment and how that creates a downward spiral of funding and lack of programming support for student learning. So, some people think that it's pretty easy. If you have less students, you have less expenses, and therefore you can just cut back your budget. But it's far more complicated than that. So this is about understanding the fiscal impact of declining enrollment, which many states are facing, many urban and suburban and even rural districts, especially rural districts, are facing this downward economic spiral and how that impacts all programming. So as we look through this, here's what a typical classroom with one teacher and 30 students looks like. And I use 30 students because most of our local districts right now have already cut that back. Where we used to think elementary classrooms were 1 to 25 or 1 to 20, many of these local districts are pushing their classroom sizes up to 30. So you have one teacher and 30 students, and you can create some ratios there of staffing costs. So here's my one teacher. Here are my 30 students. Basically what you have here in the state of Michigan, for most base foundation districts, you have one student equals $6,800 in per pupil funding for that student. If you have 30 students, you have a classroom revenue. Also, the district's revenue for those 30 students is $204,000. If you look at this and you explore how that whole piece fits together, $80,000 of that will go for the total compensation of that one teacher. The rest of that funding is wrapped around textbooks, paying the heat, the electricity, supplies, busing, fundamental upkeep of the grounds, all of those things that are wrapped around, but the human expense for the teacher only is $80,000, and that sometimes is conservative because you're looking at retirement costs and the other things that build into that. So that's what this whole presentation is built around. One student is $6,800, 30 students is $204,000 in revenue, and one teacher costs us about $80,000 in total compensation. So here's what happens when we have a declining enrollment piece. Let's say we've rolled this back to one teacher and 24 students. So we've lost 6 from that classroom. There's my one teacher. Here are my 24 students. I've lost 6. Now this could be just this classroom alone or spread out across the district. And here's where the interesting piece comes in. I still have that one student equals $6,800, but because I've lost 6 students, my revenue instead of $204,000 is $163,000. But my expenses are still the same for that instructional cost. I still have to pay the teacher the total compensation of $80,000 because I don't have enough students lost to be able to condense the section. I still have to offer the section. I'm just less efficient because of declining enrollment. Now, here's where that really hurts. That was a 20% declining in enrollment. That decline in enrollment equals a reduction in funding of $40,000, or the equivalent of 1/2 of a teacher. So I'm operating this at what would be nice to have half of that expense, but I can't do it because I still have that class to provide an instructor. So even at a 20% declining enrollment, that does not reduce my staffing cost. It just reduces my ability to pull revenue in to be able to pay my expenditures. So that impacts us all across the board. Now, let's take a look at when we can actually make a fiscal adjustment. I can't condense 2 small classrooms into one until I get to a 40% declining enrollment mark. So if you take a look at this, I still have to offer 2 teachers until I get it down to 40% declining enrollment. So when I'm looking at that, still using the same formula, 60 students have to be reduced by 24, and now instead of it being that $400,000, it's $244,000, and then I can get my first fiscal break, the first fiscal break off of declining enrollment. But it has to be so extensive that it's 40% declined enrollment. And this has an argument even when it comes to consolidating schools. The numbers just don't fit. They don't work. And we just have to start understanding that there has to be a different way, a different model. And if we look at this, 40% decline in enrollment equals a reduction in funding of $81,000, or the equivalent of one teacher. and that's finally when I can actually break even on my fiscal challenges. So until I get the 40% declining enrollment, I can't find a significant cut in labor cost. That's when the first labor cut occurs for the instructional staff. So let's take a look at what it looks like across the board. So funding expenses in my deficit, wrapped around the total costs. So if you could see, the left is my costs, on the bottom is my percent decline, and you can observe what it takes to actually see how this goes. So my deficit continues to increase as I decline in enrollment until I reach 40%, and then my deficit drops. Always my funding is reducing. My expenses plateau at each threshold, and then ultimately at every 40 percentile, so 40% and then 80%, I continue to have drops. So once I get to 80%, I can flatline that out, but it continues to have this duration of drops until finally I no longer exist. So the message here is, even though you may be reducing your students, that does not equal the same level of reduction in staffing, because you still have this feel that you have to provide sections based on numbers of classroom ratios. If you get above 34, 35, 36, regardless of what the research says, you're going to get declining enrollment because parents are going to leave your district. They're going to right size your class sizes for you. So just wanted to share this. It's an interesting debate, a conversation piece, because some people explore the funding aspects of school and assume that because you declined in enrollment, you've also declined in cost. The only thing that you've declined in for the most part is revenue. You've declined in revenue, but your expenditures stay the same. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'd love to be able to converse with you about the impact of declining enrollment. This is just a fiscal approach. But as you know, as the funding reduces and the expenses remain the same and your deficit increases as a result, other programs suffer. Supports to kids suffer. So there has to be a different way. I think there are some different ways. So looking forward to any conversation about this. Have yourself a great day.